Welcome to This Explainer. We're kicking off a series looking at a fascinating literature review. And today, we're diving right into the core factors that shape how we learn the sounds of a new language. So let's start with a big question, one I'm sure you've wondered about. Why is it that some people can pick up a new accent and sounds almost native, while others really struggle? This isn't just a casual curiosity, it's a central question in second language acquisition research. So what's really going on? Well, the research he reviews makes it clear that learning a new sound system is anything but random. In fact, it's shaped by a powerful trio of interconnected factors, and we're about to break down each one. Here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the influence of your native language, what he calls the first language fingerprint. Then we'll tackle the critical age factor. After that, we'll dive into the power of L2 experience. And finally, we'll see how it all fits together. All right, first up, the first language fingerprint. This is all about how our native tongue, our L1, acts as a fundamental blueprint that really shapes everything that follows. He starts by highlighting this incredible process called perceptual narrowing. Get this. As babies, our brains are basically universal listeners. We can tell the difference between sounds from any language on Earth. But by our first birthday, our brains have already started to specialize, tuning in to the specific sounds of our own native language. And that early tuning has massive long-term effects. As adults, our L1 essentially works as a filter. When we hear a new sound from a second language, our brain tries to cram it into the sound categories we already know. This can cause a kind of interference, making it really tricky to hear subtle but important differences in the new language. A fantastic study by McAllister and his team in 2002 shows this perfectly. They looked at 3 different groups learning Swedish. Estonian speakers, whose native language has similar vowel rules, sounded pretty close to native Swedes. English speakers were kind of in the middle, but the Spanish speakers, whose language doesn't use vowel duration in the same way, were the most different. You can literally see the L1 fingerprint at work. So the main takeaway from this first section is just unmistakable. The author concludes that our first language provides the absolute foundation, shaping not only how we produce new sounds, but how we even hear them in the first place. Okay, so we have our L1 foundation. Now let's move on to the second factor, the critical age factor. Does it really matter when you start learning if you want to get the accent down? Well, according to the research he cites, the answer is a pretty strong yes. I know we all hear stories about someone who started late and sounds just like a native speaker, but the data from tons of studies shows that's actually super rare for people who start later in life. A classic study by Fledge from 1991 really drives this point home. He looked at a super specific detail called voice onset time. It's that tiny puff of air after consonants like p, t, and k. He found that Spanish speakers who learned English as kids made this puff of air almost exactly like native English speakers. But those who started as adults, their production was acoustically very different. And what's really wild is how persistent this age effect is. Even after living in a new country for an average of 32 years, learners who started later still showed clear pronunciation differences linked to when they arrived. Time alone, it seems, can't fully erase that initial wiring. Now, I know this might sound a little discouraging, but it is definitely not the whole picture. Let's look at the third key factor, the power of L2 experience. This is where learners really have some control. He's quick to point out that language experience is way more than just how many years you've lived somewhere. It's really about the quantity and the quality of your interactions. How much are you actively using that new language versus sticking with what's familiar? This study shows exactly what that means in the real world. Researchers compared 2 groups in Canada who had been there for a similar amount of time. The Slavic speakers, who reported using English a lot more in their daily lives, were rated as more fluent and easier to understand. The Mandarin speakers, who had less interaction, scored lower. It's not just about being there, it's about engaging. And plenty of other studies back this up. More experience leads to real, measurable improvements, like more accurate vowel sounds and even better production of famously tricky contrasts like the English R and L. Experience, plain and simple, drives progress. Okay, so here's the crucial part where we bring it all together. These 3 things, your L1, your age, and your experience, they don't work in isolation. They are all part of one big interconnected system. He synthesizes all these findings into a pretty clear model. Your final outcome in speaking a second language is a product of this dynamic interplay. Your L1 provides the foundation, your age of learning sets certain parameters, and then your experience determines how much you build on top of that. And this is the key. Research shows that even when learners improve a ton with more experience, the specific kinds of challenges they still face often trace right back to their native language. Experience helps you get better, but that L1 fingerprint is always there, influencing the journey. So, to quickly recap the main points from his review, your journey starts with the L1 foundation. Your age of learning tends to set a general trajectory, but it's your active experience with the language that truly pushes you forward. Ultimately, he concludes that these three things form an interconnected system. And why this matters is that it helps explain the huge variety we see among language learners. There's no single magic bullet. It's a combination of where you start, when you start, and the path you take.